Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello, and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show just one bouquet short of a rose ceremony. Obviously, I'm Christy Powell, and I'm joined tonight by a panel of popcorn-throwing reality TV star superstans and real-life 90-day fiancés, including Phoebe Rose.
Oh, hello.
Miss O'Kiss.
Hello.
And our guest panelist, licensed professional counselor, Ashley Hogan.
And tonight's poll is reality TV dating really just harmless entertainment? And you can vote on that, and we'll find out the results of the poll towards the end of the show. In the meantime, we are going to be talking about that drink-throwing, taunting toxicity of reality television. So, if you want to call us with your stories or questions, you can reach us at 512-991-9242. I have dyscalculia, so that's fun. Or on tiny.cc/callsex, because the show is coming now.
Okay, well, I know from our pre-show that we are all chomping at the bit to get into this conversation, but let us not forget to take a moment and appreciate those things this week that have been turning us on. So, Phoebe, let me start quickly with you. What's got you revved up this week?
Well, lots of things get me revved up this week. I mean, well, my car, for one thing, it's nice and sexy. It's feeling that sexiness, my car, because, it's had an engine tune and, it's revving up and, it's getting me quite fired up. So, a Brit and her car. What do you want?
Hey, fair enough. Glad to hear it.
What kind of car is it?
A nice one.
It's the best kind.
My car. It's mine.
Yeah, Miss O, what about you? What's got you worked up right now?
I don't want to say turning me on because people will be scared of me, but I've been really digging the Cabinet of Curiosities, like Guillermo del Toro's anthology show. It is out there. It is great. And if you like things that are disturbing and, as we said earlier, are missing Black Mirror, not in real life, then maybe.
Yeah. No, I'm totally stoked for it. Thank you so much. I'm glad to hear that lives up to the hype.
So good.
Ashley, what about you? What's got you worked up right now?
I also don't know if I want to say turned on because, but my boyfriend got me all the Sailor Moon manga for Christmas.
Yeah, there you go.
I know, I'm blessed. And it's just making my little heart go pitter patter. But I have to forget that she's 14.
Yeah, it's art, right? Not an actual 14-year-old. It's complicated.
It's complicated.
Dubiously legal in the UK.
And depending on what state you're in the United States.
Yeah, yep. So there's a lot of messiness, obviously, in the way our culture deals with sex and love and relationships. And that's, I guess, what we are here to try and sort through tonight. I'll go ahead and say I know that I'm in the minority tonight because before I turn everything over to you 90-day blind love bachelorettes, I wanted to at least take a moment and acknowledge that personally, I find reality TV dating shows kind of challenging. Like, not just myself, but everybody involved in this show donates all of these hours volunteering to help bring people like hopefully useful information and valuable conversations about diverse relationships, about autonomy, about dismantling the patriarchy. And, it feels kind of weird to be having a conversation about these shows that kind of routinely demonize bisexuals as being untrustworthy, that take for granted a number of toxic gender roles, and that seem to like really emphasize a toxic level of mate guarding and enforced monogamy. I mean, is that a fair take from all of you? I mean, what could I be missing here? Ashley, let me start with you.
Well, first of all, tell me how you really feel. I mean, honestly, I don't think there's any entertainment out there, books, shows, TVs, other movies, otherwise, that aren't problematic in some way. Like,
Sure.
I think with any sort of entertainment that we consume, there has to be a bit of a willing suspension of disbelief sometimes, depending on what it is that we're watching. So you're not necessarily wrong.
Sure.
But
I get that it's very cool to dunk on reality dating shows. I mean, you can just check the YouTube chat right now, and I know that there are just as many people who base their personality around hating these shows as there are people who love these shows. So I want to try and own that.
Yeah, like, I think we're all just doing our best to be within our values in this capitalist society. And sometimes
there is no ethical television consumption under late stage capitalism.
I truly believe that there's not, and if there is, it's probably not a very good show. And we're all just doing
dark.
We're all just doing our best out here. And if this is the garbage that I get to consume, I will consume my garbage, and I'm fine.
I will consume my garbage, and I'm fine. Miss O'Kist, how does that sit with you?
Honestly, I agree with you, and I think that's one of the things I actually really enjoy about watching these shows, weirdly, is because my friend group it's very queer, very neurodivergent. None of the demographics that are in these shows really feature in my life pretty much at all. So I kind of watch it with this like fascination of, oh, so this is where all the bullshit in the world is coming from. People, I guess, have these like weird hang-ups of like, well, if you're friends with a man, then you're clearly cheating, or whatever weird bullshit that these things will come up with. And it's like, I forget that I forget that, I guess, just really straight basic people exist. So I kind of like those shows for that reason.
Yeah, all right. So there's a little bit of like ogling, and I can appreciate the voyeurism that goes into that. Phoebe, what about for you? What am I missing about the quality?
You're watching the wrong shows. You're watching the wrong one. Because in Britain we actually have some really good ones. I mean, we have First Dates and First Dates Hotel, which is basically just people going on a first date. So they've got cameras.
My own
all around
first dates are too miserable to watch.
They'll have people that are like really awkward. That
do you have reality shows about like urology appointments or?
Well, there is there is Dr. Pimple Popper, so there is. Just don't go there.
Yeah. Well, so a bunch of y'all hit on this, but it does seem like a big part of what makes these shows relatable is just watching these like really big personalities in these hyperbolic situations be messy. Like, are we watching these shows out of like Schadenfreude, like a desire to see people mess up?
Of course.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
Human nature. Of course.
Walk me through it. Yeah.
Phoebe. The thing is, though, I think it's because I'm in Britain. There are those Schadenfreude nonsense over the top shows that's called Married at First Sight. But then we also have the other shows which are just ogling at people like Naked Attraction, First Dates Hotel, First Dates, etc., where basically it's just a fly on the wall. Oh, look at these people. They're having a date. You're never going to see them again. Next. Whereas Married at First Sight UK, it's wall-to-wall nonsense.
Oh.
Then you have Married at First Sight Australia, Married at First Sight New Zealand, Married at First Sight USA, Married at First Sight South Africa, etc., etc., etc.
I think that's actually a good point, though. Like, there is like a culture element that goes into these shows, like, and American reality TV seems way worse with like okay, we need the drama, and if people aren't fighting, nothing is nothing is happening.
Sure.
Because I remember like there's actually a Love Is Blind Japan, very different tone from the American one. Or even like if you go into Kitchen Nightmares when that one came over to America, and we're like,
Yes, they're
we're
so
gonna need to make
different.
over the whole restaurant, otherwise no one will care. And like all the weird fights that weren't real because you could see the splice from the reaction was like done before the makeover right of the restaurant, but the argument was like after. So
Right.
like
Well-
a lot of it does seem to be a way Americans like to write their reality television. We seem to just like to make it real messy here.
You write your reality TV like your politics. Absolutely devoid of reality.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the part that I like about it, though, because like with any like entertainment, like it's about escapism. Like
Sure.
this show, and I've been watching reality TV since Jerry Springer during the summer or whenever I
Right.
was like homesick from school. Like I've been watching those talk shows and shit since I was a kid, and so it is like it's just like an escapism of it's reality, but it's not really
But
reality.
curated.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, is there like a cautionary tale element here? I mean, does
Oh,
it
a billion
benefit our
percent.
society to watch people like fuck up and drop the ball in these silly ways?
I mean, does it benefit our society to watch football or
Hey,
basketball?
valid question. Yeah.
Hey,
No,
oi,
no,
oi,
no.
oi, 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 oi.
I
You just
mean,
don't
like-
get it. You just don't get it. Look, oi, I was liking you at the start. I was liking you at the start.
I mean, I feel like that question could go for like any sort of like television or entertainment or movies of like, is there a value to it?
Yeah, no, I definitely think that that's a important thing to keep in mind here. So many of the criticisms that we level in particular towards like pornography or any type of really sexual expression does tend to get a little bit of extra, I don't know, aggression from the rest of us. A lot of extra judgment.
I think one thing that when I watch reality TV, which might be different to other people watching reality TV, is the thing I always think about is the only thing real is that it's really on TV.
Yeah.
Because like none of it, I used to know somebody who worked in reality television, and I'm not going to mention the shows or anything because I don't want to get into trouble. But like, it's very heavily edited, and there's a story in mind that they're trying to tell. And I kind of think reality TV now, at least the people going into it, I think are more aware of what they're getting into. Like they know it's going to be bullshit. They know they're going to be mangled into some kind of character. And then they choose to do it because it might make them famous. Whereas I think originally people were like, oh, it's going to be reality as I am. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
As much like the influencer fight that it's kind of turned into.
Right.
I mean, that's a big part of like The Bachelor and Bachelorette now is that like a lot of people do go on because they get these huge platforms afterwards and make a fuck ton of money just posting on Instagram and TikTok. And like, listen, again, with late stage capitalism, I can't fault them for that. Shit, I do it too.
Yeah.
But I have to ask this one question. Are we focusing only on the negatives here?
No.
No.
But here's the real question. Here's a thing to pose. Are we only seeing it from the point of view of somebody who's watching the show? What happens about the people that go onto the show and actually experience the dating, experience the show itself? How different is it when you're actually a person on the show? And some of there's like Married at First Sight. You're actually getting married to somebody and you're actually having an intimate relationship with somebody. And some of these relationships do last beyond the show. So are we just focusing on this TV conglomerate must sell advertising space on whatever your network is? Whereas actually there are real people here going in there for a real purpose. And some of these people come out with real positive goals. Like some people have got married and have children. Some people have gone on first dates for the very first time and got over that hurdle. And are we just looking at this because we are seeing it as sensationalist television and forgetting there are real people here that are doing real things that could be really benefiting from this?
Yeah, I mean it's a fair point to raise, but I also know that the statistics on the longevity of most of those relationships, and not to be glib about it, but the numbers around former reality TV show contestants who have completed suicide and things along those lines are definitely worth at least being concerned about, right?
But that's the TV companies themselves that need to put in better aftercare.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's unquestionable, but they're not, right? And we're still like, giving them ad dollars and everything else. I'm not saying this is a great sin, but I think it's at least worth raising the question, right?
And that's what we should be holding them to the fire over, but we shouldn't be taking away these potential positives that people could be getting out.
Sure.
Because if you've got, say, an anxiety and someone offers you an opportunity to say, have a go at a marriage because you've struggled for God knows how long, and you go through this experience and it doesn't work out, okay, you've given it a go and you've gone down that avenue. But what if you actually do find somebody through these shows? Marriage isn't easy to actually get right. Marriages themselves, what is it? 2 out of 3 marriages in America end in divorce now?
That was 50%.
Crazy statistic.
Give us a little bit of credit.
I think that's actually one of the things, though, because when you look at how they construct the shows, you've always got the 2 camps. There's like there's a few people where they're actually giving it a go on whatever the premise is, and I do find myself rooting for them deeply. And actually, Love is Blind Japan was a really good example of that, because people were taking it very seriously and asking like important questions about how do you see your life down the line, and all the things that they would like, like personal values and everything else, and was actually trying to find people that would work. And I find with the shows, they got the ones like that, and then they've got like their popcorn criteria. So I think they invite people in to be part of the actual premise, and then they have the people in for memes.
And then you have shows that are just memes, like Too Hot to Handle.
Interestingly, like I want to say the last season of Love is Blind, there were 2 couples that got married and stayed married. None of them were on the show, though. Like all of their content got cut, probably because it was very boring, maybe.
Right.
People actually.
What does that say?
I think that's the interesting thing, when people are actually being genuinely real and trying to like open up about their insecurities and like their hopes and dreams. Like that's actually what I'd like to see more of. And I think other countries maybe hold on to that more than they do here. But yeah, like I think like I've seen some things even on like Naked Attraction where they just like hit it off and we're like, yes. And then there's the ones who are like, I keep doing this stupid thing, and then they do the stupid thing, and I'm like, it didn't work out. And we're like, well, we already knew that was your pattern.
Yeah, everybody in episode 2 already knew that.
I would love to see more of the actual people who are in it for the actual premise and see different kinds of people navigating this shit. And I wish we could see more of that. Dear reality TV people, if you're watching,
be more real,
that.
please. Yeah.
Well, Naked Attraction really does do that. I mean, Naked Attraction, it will take anyone who's anyone on Naked Attraction. It doesn't matter whether you're a cis person, trans person, monogamous, poly, they'll take you. And I think that that's something that we need to see, is that reality dating shows, well, some of them in the UK at least, are starting to reflect society and are starting to actually break down some of these cis heteronormative nonsensical relationships that we're told we must have.
Well, I mean,
I like
to Ashley's point earlier, like we don't necessarily expect all of the content we consume to perfectly line up with all of our values. I like to pretend to be a space marine and play Halo just like everybody else, and I don't necessarily want to like kill the Covenant or whatever. But
you don't?
I don't know. Yeah,
Why
well,
not?
all right. Well, okay.
Why not?
Considering. But I mean, do you worry at all about normalizing the kind of bigoted beliefs that I mentioned at the top? Does it feel like sometimes these things are just like taken for granted in a lowest common denominator type of discourse?
Yeah, I think again, Love is Blind. They had one guy who was bisexual, and him and this woman that he was like, they got through the pods, and they were doing really well. And she found out he was bisexual, and she lost her damn mind. And that was really hard for me to watch, because I'm just like, it was all of the bullshit stereotypes that you're used to hearing, like just coming out, and
nobody there to really like correct it. Right? Like, I don't mean to be a skulk, but it didn't feel like the editing or anything else.
No, the editing lead into it. But at the end, they do like the recap show, and the guy who was, I guess, targeted by all that got to have a say. And was the conversation very great or nuanced? No, I don't think he really. I think they got too much into it's both sides, and I'm like, yeah, but one side's
But
not
is it?
right
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
So they gave it a go, but I don't know that these shows necessarily keep it going, like add to it. As like I said before, I watch it because all of these people are people I never encounter in my real life, and I'm like, oh my god, people who listen to this kind of music exist. This is wild to me.
Yeah.
But I think most of the people watching it who are going to agree are already feeling that way, and they're already part of that culture. Maybe they get to see some of it mirrored back and be like, actually, that guy was a real catch and a total hottie, and she totally like fucked up there. Maybe I think it's going to be on the viewership, on the receiving end of the people actually watching it. But I think maybe some people might see the ugliness of their views reflected in the ugliness of how things play out in reality television, perhaps.
Yeah,
I hope.
if it's not being just reinforced, sure.
Yeah, and I mean, they didn't seem to be like, yes, this person is correct, this is a good thing to do. I think it was kind of shown rather flatly, perhaps. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, the fact that they don't ever have any like anyone not straight, anyone not traditionally attractive, anyone not monogamous, anybody over any age, anybody outside of a certain body type is, I think, problematic, and one of the things that makes it, well, way less interesting than it could be here.
Yeah.
They're like, Love is Blind, and I'm like, yeah, but like, if you know everybody on the other side is a smoking number 10 hottie that could be on Sports Illustrated at any time, are you really testing
How blind
this
is
theory?
it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it truly an
10 packets a
experiment?
day, go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've kind of touched on how the appeal of some of these shows is like that curated realness and that fake reality, obviously. I guess let me start with the two people who actually went through the K-1 visa process that's depicted in 90 Day Fiancé. How should we feel about the realness or lack thereof? Of
There's
these
none.
Okay, so there's just not.
All I say is 90 Day Fiancé is a load of tosh. Absolute codswalloping, nonsensical, round the bend tosh. You may as well deep fry it and serve it with your fish and chips. That's how much reality it has left in it and how much life it's got bearing on what I'm going through at the moment and what other people that have done a K1 visa. It's nothing like that whatsoever. I mean, K1 visas are not the easiest thing to get. They don't take 15 seconds and you can't just rock up and go, yeah! You've actually got to go through the motions. You've got to have a genuine relationship. You have the US government breathing down your neck going, have you really met this person? Is this really somebody that you're in a relationship with? Can we see some photographs of you on holiday? Can we see some bank statements together? Can we see, some evidence that, you're actually living together? It's not like, hey, I've just rocked up from this country again. I'm having a relationship. It doesn't work that way.
Sure.
The amount of times they're like, we're just going to get married and then come over. And I'm like, I know that the government doesn't like that. Also, that's separate visa. That's a don't do. Because then they think you're being dishonest and sketchy because you didn't come to them first. And there's like there's a lot. And I think this is a mixed bag. Like, you'll see a couple of couples on that where you're like, yeah, I think they're going through the process of actually doing this shit, which is, it's stressful and time consuming and expensive. Like, you've got to get your like a printout of your criminal record or lack of, and have it, all of this weird shit. You got to go get tested for leprosy. I don't have leprosy. How many people here can say that?
I don't have leprosy either. The other things you've got to bear in mind is that, yes, I don't have leprosy, but I've also had to go to the US Embassy in London on a number of occasions. I've got other appointments at the embassy in London, and it ain't cheap. My solicitor ain't cheap.
Yeah, and I just love that in that show, the narrative is almost universally the family going, well, I mean, why can't you find an American? They're just using you to get into America.
I mean, that feels pretty real depending on where
America.
you're at.
No, it does. That feels like genuine footage. Just the notion that anybody who would go through this process would do it basically as like a form of, tricking their way into the United States.
everyone's Dr. House and his Ukrainian bride who he didn't have sex with because he had a rule of not having sex with married women. I mean, for goodness sakes, it's not how it works.
I mean,
I think part of that though is that like they assume that people wouldn't watch that. I would watch that because like I'm a nosy bitch and I want to know the whole thing. But
High five.
Yeah, right. But most people like they just want to see like the juicy parts of it, and so like the parts that are more real, like a lot of people wouldn't watch that. And I think that's part of why they put that in there is because with American television, a lot of people just want to see people fight.
Yeah, fair to say.
There was definitely like some of the drama and stuff was real. Like I met my husband who we've been married for 20 years as of December. It's finally in the good gifts part. But like I was in college and I met on like an old BBS board about like hardcore bands. And we had an argument and hit it off from there. But like when I was like a 21-year-old girl going home to my parents was like, I met this guy on the internet from America. We're in love. I'm going to get married and I'm moving to America. My parents' reaction was exactly what you would expect it to be and exactly what you would want for an episode of 90 Day Fiancé at first. It was like record scratch. What?
It's like when I told my father, it's like, okay, so you've met an American whilst you were in Thailand together and you're now doing a relationship and you're now doing all this. Why do you make life difficult for yourself?
Why are you like this?
But I wish they could have shown some of like the more, I guess, the less juicy moments, because there were also like some really great moments when like my family did meet the guy I ended up marrying, and things went really well. They were like, my dad was really supportive and like had like a really good moment with him when I went on the embassy trip, because that was one of those times when it got really real, and he was there to help me like through all of that because I was by myself. And yeah, walking down to the embassy, there'd been a riot recently, so there was a lot of people with huge guns pointing down from the roof, and they're like, is your name on the list? And I'm like, I fucking hope so. There are so many guns right now.
All I say is I love Grosvenor Square.
I do too, but not when there's a riot to embassies down. That's less fun. But like, I think it would be interesting if they showed some more of the process, because the process is kind of interesting. And, there are conversations, you wouldn't think about it necessarily, England to America, but there were a lot of culture shocks when they first moved here. And visiting is different to living, and trying to find ways to like incorporate bits of, my, like, I guess, culture growing up, and his, because like American holidays are weird, y'all.
They are not insane.
They're not right. So like trying to find like a balance between, that, or does it will still like translate for me when I like go off on some weird, I don't know, I use the wrong words for things, like y'all call our Mars bars Milky Ways, and your Three Musketeers or our Milky, all of that shit. So if I'm telling a story, just is like, actually what she's talking about is a ... And I'm like, thank you for explaining. And chips or crisps. It's like...
You invented English. I guess we perfected it. You know what? I'm not going to make that claim. But let's take a moment and jump on the phones. Phoebe, who you got for us?
We do have Suzanne phoning in from Illinois, and so let's talk to Suzanne. Hello, Suzanne. You are live on Secular Sexuality. I'm Phoebe Rose. What would you like to talk about tonight?
Hi, guys. I know I'm a little off topic. I've had this burning question. I make porn, and I have a Pornhub, and I really enjoyed making the content. I felt in control of myself and my own income and, the compliments I'd get from folk. And then when Roe v. Wade went out the window, I kind of felt icky. It felt like all of a sudden I didn't have, like, it's not that anybody came up and said, you can't make porn anymore. But all of a sudden it was like, I'm making content for people who will actively choose to despise me and vote against me by voting Republican, like, and I can't necessarily, curtail, like, only Democrats can watch my content. Like, I don't want to be like that at all, but I find it hard to get back into the swing of things when I'm constantly fighting against the patriarchy that's like, fuck you for making porn. But on the same breath, it's like, they're going to devour it. They're going to click on my stuff. And I'm like, hey, click on my stuff. That just gets me more money. But it's kind of this weird middle ground where it's like, I don't know if people deserve the content that I make if they're going to be creeps.
Yeah, I mean, in an oppressive society, living well is a transgressive act. It makes sense to me that you would feel pretty vulnerable and like you are, God, I hate to say like on the chopping block, but we recognize that our sex workers are really, really vulnerable. And that certainly didn't feel any better after the Dobbs decision.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I want to get back. I want to get back to it because I have fans who are like, we haven't seen you in months. Are you okay? Are you still there? I've met genuine people through my porn, which was something I never thought I'd ever like. I thought when I first started making porn, I was just going to get like, oonga boonga, ooh, you got big boobies, me like. I never anticipated that I was going to get these wonderful people coming out of the woodwork who were, I had one person typing an email to me and he says, I'm literally trembling as I type this to you because I just don't know how to put the words into how much I like your content, into how genuine you are, and yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. And to have somebody who reached out to me who was like, I'm trembling talking to you, a porn person, and I'm over here like, oh my God, I don't know if I should put a picture of my butt on the internet. I might get doxxed. In extreme circumstances, of course. I don't know. I just kind of wanted to mull around and talk about it because you guys have talked to so many more folk than I have, and I don't know. I just kind of wanted the sounding board. Like, am I valid in my feelings? Like, should I just get, like, because I don't necessarily want to like, oh yeah, the government's taking away my pleasure to do this thing, but I have very many complicated feelings about it now. And sure. I don't know what I should be doing in some regard.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked to a ton of sex workers on this show, and there's reason to feel like things are headed in the wrong direction. There are counterexamples. I do think that for all of the criticisms we can levy against OnlyFans in particular, it has also served to normalize at least a certain type of pornography and pornographer in a lot of ways. And I do think that there's reason to believe that more people around you, more people in your office, more people in your neighborhood are participating in this system than ever have before. So there's some safety in that, but we're calling people performing at drag shows groomers. There's a lot of violence around a lot of these kinds of ideas. But I didn't mean to step over you. Miss Lucas, were you speaking?
Oh, I was going to say, like, I understand the issue of not wanting to entertain people or even like give any kind of decent quality of life or anything good to the people who would take anything away from us. Like, yeah, there are probably going to be people who are hypocritical assholes who are going to be, consuming the media and then voting against, but like you said, you've also got the ones who you're helping and having a really good connection with. And I think if you enjoy the work and you want to be doing it, and there are people that you're making real connections with and real differences with, I think to take those things away from both yourself and those people kind of is a win for the Republican assholes who that's what they want. Like, it's a weird thing, and I don't understand these people at all, because it's like, I want this thing, but I want to outlaw the thing, and it's just like,
because when I do it, it makes sense. It's in a healthy way.
Too. Like, I don't want to pay workers' wages, but I sure as hell want a Big Mac for 99 cents on the dollar. I'm so sick and tired. It's like every avenue I turn on, and it's not just porn. It just seems like everybody, if they don't like something, they're going to cancel it instead of like meeting in the middle of like, hey, there are drag queens reading at the library. Why are drag queens reading at the library? Let's take an extra step and, you know, see, maybe we should have not drag queens. Maybe we should have, you know, like every part of the community, Black people, Asian people, gay people, you know, every sort of different sort of perspective to enlighten people. And it feels just like we'd rather be ignorant than enlightened in some regards.
I mean, yeah, if we're going to talk about reality dating and describe American politics, I think you're hitting it on the head here.
So I wanted to just ask a quick question. How did you feel, say, a year ago doing porn? How did you feel doing it?
A year ago, I kind of almost, like, I don't know why all of a sudden it's become more prominent where I'm, like, weird about it. But, like, a year I was just kind of like, oh, I'll just ignore it. You know, I'll just kind of keep doing what I like to do, keep making, you know, the content that I like to produce. And I just kind of put my nose to the grindstone and didn't really pay attention too much to the political discourse. And then once it kind of came to a head, I was kind of like, well, I have to, it was kind of like I felt that I had to put my words, or at least put some action of my own into semblance, because I was like, I'm not going to just sit back and let people who, you know, would devour the content actively vote against it kind of shit. But, you know, like I said, I don't have any control over people, or, you know, I would like to think that, you know, like somebody would come out of the woodwork and be like, oh, you know, maybe this is, you know, like, not that I'm creating content that's like, oh, yeah, by the way, this is educational. Here's how I do porn. Ha ha. You know, it's still the same butt on the screen, whatever. But I'd like to think that maybe my style is a little bit more, like, unique. Obviously, there's a reason why people have come to my porn rather than the hundreds of thousands of other butts on the internet.
Well, I wonder if there's a way that, like, you could integrate your, like, own political ideas into your pornography to where, like, it feels more empowering. I don't know why the first thing I think of is maybe you riding a pillow of Mitch McConnell's face. I don't know.
I mean, there are OnlyFans. There
but
are
like
certainly OnlyFans pages that are just people talking about politics while naked or while masturbating or whatever else. And, you know, it's okay to, I guess, like, queer your content that way. Yeah.
I know that there's like a femdom out there who does like, she has like Republican clients and will make them basically like read, you know, books on like LGBTQ rights or whatever, and have them
love her.
write lines and things like that. And like basically, and I'm like, fucking A.
My queen.
Maybe they'll learn something along the way.
It's like a dominatrix who forces her clients to vote Democrat or something. I'd heard about something like that. Yeah. You know,
You got to whip those votes any way you can.
I don't know if I go as far as to, like, you know, make all my clients vote Democrat in that regard, but, you know, I just feel icky. You know, I like my audience how it is now. But, you know, there's that double-edged sword of, like, if I keep making content, I'm eventually just going to get more popular just because I'm going to accrue so much content, and, you know, my audience will just grow. People will share the content, what have you. And then it just becomes kind of scary to me because right now I have a small audience of, like, I think I have, like, 3,000 subscribers or something. It's pretty small in regards to, like, the millions of subscribers you hear about on YouTube every day. But it also kind of scares me that once I get, like, a larger audience, it's going to be, one, more overwhelming because there's going to be so many voices coming directly at me because I'm one person and there's 3,000 plus. I mean, not necessarily like everybody's going to be like typing all at the same time. Hello, I love your shit. But I'm like frightened a little bit of like the audience becoming too big and too unruly, I guess. You guys are all perverts. Stop.
No, I mean it's totally fair, and I guess the last thing that I will throw into all of this is to say I can't tell you whether or not it's safe for you to keep doing this kind of work or what you should do, but I will say that without wanting to overly conflate the two, we're here, a lot of us under our real names, talking about these same sorts of issues that, should there be a reckoning? Should there be like a burning of things? And it is scary, right? Like I have to be very aware of the fact that my name, my business is all readily available and connected to this atheist activism. And it makes sense for you to be a little bit concerned. So the only advice I can really give you is to take the necessary steps to like protect yourself and to cover up your digital footprint. I'll point you maybe towards the work of Amberly Rothfield, who has been on the show a number of times and who has a bunch of materials about how to maintain that safety, and just encourage you to do what you can to be like a part of the solution without overextending yourself, because it makes sense to feel a little anxious here.
And one thing,
Thank you, because that was the other thing. I'm like, am I just overbearing? Am I just being too anxious? Because I'm an anxious person in general anyway. So it was another reason I wanted to call in. Like, am I over exaggerating on my fears? And it's nice to know that maybe I'm not too crazy.
They're definitely valid.
I also want to say, when you're talking about the audience getting too big, you can kind of tier things too. Like, say you've got, like right now, you've got 20 people messaging you a week, and eventually you could end up with like 2,000. You're not contractually obliged, or you don't have to give the same amount of yourself and effort to all of those messages. Like, you'd still be able to like look through, and if there's someone there that you think like you could make a connection with or a difference for, like, still choose to have the same kind of interactions you're having now. But like, if you just got the guys who were just like hot tits or whatever, like the low effort content is what they call it on. So yeah, you can like screen, and as things grow, you can start like figuring things out because it's unlikely, I would imagine, to go from like, like 3,000 to 3 million overnight. So as things grow, it'll give you time to figure out what your limits are. Like, it can be very exhausting giving a lot of time to people. And you'll be able to figure that out as you grow. So you can kind of feel out as it's happening, like where your limits are, what you don't want to go beyond, and make boundaries. And just because somebody is there on the screen doesn't mean, you owe them your time or your emotional labor. And you can definitely set those boundaries for yourself, as it goes along. Like, you're not obligated to keep the same level of engagement with everybody.
Well, do you have any?
This is where I get where I'm like, oh my God, I have to interact with everybody. But thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate your time. And
well, thank you for your call, Suzanne. I hope that we have been very helpful. And feel free to call back into the show should things change in the future. We'd love to have a follow-up from you. Thank you ever so much.
All right. Well, let's get back into the conversation here in just a moment. But first, take a second to see what's been going on around the rest of the ACA. I think a lot of trans folks miss being invisible or less visible, or certainly not 90% of Tucker Carlson's talking point. Like, Jesus.
God, I'm just saying you shouldn't blaspheme against God, and you shouldn't be allowed to blaspheme against freedom.
Emmanuel, you know what I say to that? I say, F you. I say I will blaspheme God all the day.
Everybody thought I was a villain, but now they're seeing I was anointed by God. This is 24 hours before he got arrested.
Terrible.
But the irony is thick. The irony is thick.
Hey, don't own people because that's messed up.
It's a shame I don't have all of that, knowledge and power and compassion that the Almighty Creator Yahweh has.
And I must say, if your belief in God is causing you to be a less shitty person, then please keep believing in him. But the point is, there's no evidence to suggest that a God is needed for us to be good people or empathetic or compassionate.
Okay, well, good, bad, or ugly, all three of you continue to watch these shows. And honestly, every one of you that I approached about being on this episode absolutely jumped at the opportunity to speak in defense of these kinds of shows. So what gives? I mean, how is this kind of content added to your life? Ashley, let me start with you again.
Well, I mean, it's vulnerable. I struggle with mental health stuff, and sometimes I can't take really intense, heavy plot shows. Sure. And so reality TV has always been an easy kind of escapism and just dealing with what real world problems. And it's kind of just a way of checking out and being caught up in something that is very low stakes, at least for me, sitting on the couch watching people that I have a heavy job of being a therapist, and so watching people that I don't have to give them any sort of guidance on what the fuck to do with their life. It's just really nice, and I can have my personal opinions and tell them how fucking dumb I think it is, and it doesn't matter, and it's just nice escapism.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciate that. Miss O'Kiss, what about for you?
Similar, honestly. It is very, because we were talking earlier, I think, before we started the show, and it's I stopped watching Handmaid's Tale when it got too real. And it's kind of sad that dystopian fiction has become very mirroring of the society we live in.
Uh-huh.
And it makes routes for escapism real slim. When our day-to-day lives are taking playbook advice out of the fiction I would have enjoyed historically. And the reality TV stuff, I can look at my phone whilst I'm doing it, and I can crack jokes with my friends, and it's not that hard, and it's not that deep. I like looking for patterns, so I spend a lot of time analyzing them to try and figure out which characters they're going to make out of everybody. So it's almost when you're watching the plot and you're that guy, that's the bad guy.
Sort of a whodunit almost.
I'm that's going to be the Jessica. That's this season's Jessica. That's what they're trying to do. And I like making my predictions and seeing if I'm right. I usually am. But also a part of me is a kind of a hopeless romantic on some level too. I really like it when the ones who are real low key, and you got all the drama going off, but there's always this low key couple that's actually making stuff work. And I'm always just and it's not my friends making shitty dating decisions that I have to be yeah, but do you need to keep dating that guy?
Yes,
it's low stakes again, but I really like watching it work out. And no matter, and there's something. It's kind of an interesting juxtaposition between just the balls to the wall crazy horror of the way it's put together and then something good coming out of it. It's it's so weird. It's like a lotus, it's all the mud and something will grow out of it. It's fascinating. And I really love watching that. And sometimes I just love yelling, the person isn't real, it's a chat bot, you twat, at the screen. I'm she's not going to marry you.
The call is coming from inside the house.
And then they show up and some weird Russian dudes there Lana doesn't live here. And I'm no shit, Lana doesn't live here. No. Why are they letting you roll like this? Yeah, that was the wildest one. Yeah, I was I'm that person doesn't exist. And the guy's who are you? And I'm I hope this guy does not get killed in an alley because he should not be wandering alone. But he's got a film crew. He's fine.
Let's hope. Let's all hope. Phoebe, what about you? I mean, why so passionate here?
Well, they are escapism, and I mean, I've got a little. My fiance is going to kill me if she watches this clip because I've got this little, bit of escapism where I've got, like a copy of like National Enquirer, a glass of white wine, and a slice of cake, and my lovely comfy seat. And I just had this horrendous day, this horrendous week, and I just flop down in there. I'll pick up, National Enquirer, read a few pages of that, and I'll stick on one of the reality TV shows on your over-the-top streaming service of choice, and I will just go, oh, I'm better than you.
Yes! Oh my God, absolutely. I am better because I would not make this choice.
I'm just better than you. Look at me sat here. I've got all this around me, but I can walk away from it all and I'm just better than you.
No, you're not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, none of y'all use this word, but it sounds like you're all talking about there being some form of catharsis in these shows, like vicariously
100%.
watching people live badly, maybe throw the drink that you never got to throw, or to have the fling that you decided not to have, or whatever else. I mean, is that a big part of what you're getting out of this?
100%. I love to my poor boyfriend, because I will pause a show and I will go off on a whole rant that he does not care about, but he loves me enough to listen and be like, do you see this shit that's happening right now? I don't know what the fuck these people are trying to do, because clearly this person's lying and they're not paying attention. And he doesn't care, but he will listen to me. And I don't know if it's some weird subconscious human evolution of I don't want to be in drama, but I want to watch the drama and pretend I'm a part of the drama.
Sure.
So weirdly, my husband is the one who started it. He was working from home, and I guess he needed something on TV. And 90 Day Fiance, he was like, yeah, it's a trash fire and I can't look away. And I'm like, wait, how long have you been watching this? He's like, I got through 2 seasons. And I'm like, what? And then I started watching it with him, and we will pause it together. And I'm like, now they're trying to make her fight that other chick. And then they do. And so we will sit there, we'll have our game predictions together. And I think that might be part of the reason it's fun. It is kind of a good conversation starter.
Yeah.
It's like the first person I watched these shows with was my mother. We would sit there and we would just go, bonding time, let's just watch these people, and it was just fantastic. And my mum, she started watching the Australian version of Married at First Sight. And I went in, what is this nonsense? She went, no, stop. Give it an episode or two.
Yeah.
I was like you, and a friend of mine went, look, just give it an episode or two. And it's like, okay, there are some, genuine narcissistic lunatics here. But, the show's actually trying. They've actually got, people who are professionals, in inverted commas, with relationship science.
Yeah.
No, I do get it. It's like sports in the sense that it is a conversation starter.
There will be people who will make a March Madness setup for the Bachelor and the Bachelorette. They'll start with who are all the contestants and who they think is going to be
all these brackets.
End up at the end.
Why haven't I done this?
I know, it's so smart. I'm like, oh my God.
I mean, there were definitely times in high school for me where the only conversation my mother and I could have without there being tension and arguments was going to be about Survivor or, something along those lines. So
Big Brother.
Big Brother. Oh my God.
I definitely get trashy relationships in Big Brother. It's just whoa.
It is interesting to think that we would, form a society where we are watching people have relationships, sometimes as a way of avoiding or perhaps empowering ourselves to have relationships, or at least to have something to talk about.
Yeah, because I will say about The Bachelor and The Bachelorette is that, because I'd heard a conversation on a different podcast, where they were talking about how there was a recent season, Hannah Brown, where she had this conversation with a guy who had made it pretty far in the show. And he told her that he wanted a godly woman who was not going to have sex with other men and who was going to be pure. And this was a big thing for her because she was also a Christian woman. And so she was empowered enough to stand up and say I can have sex and Jesus still loves me. And her being able to like say that and just be like a big fuck you was just like I can see like how like especially young girls who are like watching that show or young people in general of like, oh, like I can say fuck you to this guy who has like this misogynistic take on like my sexuality, because previous to that she had sex in a windmill 3 times with Pilot Pete.
A windmill? What are we talking? Like, you know, old style windmill, or are we talking,
yes,
you know, like
they were, they were
like
in
a putt-putt
Amsterdam. No,
are we talking like a miniature golf windmill? Are we talking like an offshore windmill? Are we talking like an onshore energy generating windmill? Are we talking like, you know, flower generating windmill?
Village, like they were in Amsterdam, and so like they did like the overnights. Yes, and so like he had found out that her and Pilot Pete had fucked in a windmill, and he was like, my future wife would never.
Unless it's a tulipy one, sure. Like if it's one of those, you know, weird turbines out in the middle of nowhere, that might be questionable choice. But
that'd be strange. That would be strange.
Well, let me ask y'all. I know we've been pushing around the idea that this may normalize some values that we don't agree with, or it may, you know, put them in contrast, or at least spark a conversation. But I want to point out that reality TV has at best a complicated history with queer representation. I mean, how many shows' premises would be absolutely destroyed if like being pansexual was just allowed? You know?
You are reminding me of the show in the UK, There's Something About Miriam. So this show aired in 2004, and the whole premise of the show was there were 6 men who were competing amongst each other for the affections of the sexy 21-year-old Brazilian woman. And in the final episode, in the final few scenes, they reveal, shock horror, you've been going after a trans woman. It's like... And here's the thing about that show. The airing of that show was delayed because the 6 participants sued the show for deception and conspiracy to commit sexual assault.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So this wasn't something that was played for like a way of shaming the transphobes. It was kind of normalized that a
you know,
disgusted reaction
was the
is
Ace
natural.
Ventura moment.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So, I mean, is there reason to think that Tila Tequila or any of these other characters are in some way like normalizing sexual diversity, or are they all just like sideshow freaks meant to be sort of othered and ostracized?
Isn't all TV bad for queer representation if you look back on it? Isn't all TV bad?
I can't buy the everything is fucked up and so let's just give up kind of rhetoric, but I do take your point.
It's more to the point of we shouldn't be saying we should be stopping it. We should be trying to make it better.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the one thing I keep wanting from it. And like we talked about earlier, like the British show Naked Attraction, they actually have started doing that, and I would like to see more of that kind of thing happen, to be honest. Like there's a lot of I don't think we're going to see it in America anytime soon, because there's so much peculiar culture war around just people who exist, and I don't really get it, because it's not like I said before, it's not a discussion. People just exist. They love who they love. They are who they are. You can't change that. It's just reality. We need to, but there's so much invested in American politics in just ignoring that reality. And I will say, I think dating shows currently are part of the problem in that respect. Like I know Love is Blind had said straight up, no gays. We're not doing that. And that's a problem because, you know, I'm sure it's my demographic in the Midwest don't want to see 2 men falling in love whilst they eat hot dish, and I'm like, well, maybe they need to.
Yeah.
But I think like the fact that they have made deliberate choices to not do that is problematic. But as a genre, it is something that they could do, and I think handled correctly, I think it could maybe help bring down some barriers, because there's a difference between watching and being invested in a fictional character on television that was written by a cleverly written, writer somewhere in a room with all his friends, versus messy shit on TV. Like, if you see people as actual people,
there's not an agenda. They're just,
Right.
being human.
Just people having the same shit luck trying to find love as the rest of everybody else. And
Yeah.
I think these shows could be used and harnessed for good. I don't think they currently are. And I think there's hope, because
But I mean, there's been more than 20 years of them. I mean, the Osbournes and Survivor
changed a
were
lot,
huge
though.
in the early
It has
90s, late
changed.
90s.
Like,
But
stuff has changed a lot, and they're messing with the formula. You can see that.
It's like Married at First Sight. Take Married at First Sight. Married at First Sight used to just be all cis heterosexual couples. Now there are same-sex couples there. Quite openly, there are same-sex couples in the British version, in the Australian version, in the New Zealand version. There are multiple same-sex couples in the shows now, where it was just like, oh, there's one. Now there's like 3 or 4, and there'll be like 6 or 7 straight couples, and it's just like, it is gradually changing. And yeah, okay, the relationships, it's a relationship that you're watching unfold on television. Some relationships are shit. We have to remember this. Some people's relationships are shit.
First dates.
And so if you're going to have a TV show about relationships, it can't all be fairy tale princesses and meeting the beau of their life. Some people are abusive. Some people are shit. Some people are horrible.
And we usually don't make movies about shitty relationships. Or if we do, it's almost like the B story that facilitates, meeting Richard Gere or finding your white knight prince and all of that. But y'all started to each talk about like kind of different shows. And I guess it's worth noting that for most of this conversation, I've been really generalizing. Are there distinctions that are worth making between something like 90 Day Fiance,
A billion %.
Absolutely.
Well, like Love is Blind describes itself as an experiment, whatever that actually means.
Well, Married at First Sight,
The Bachelor, Fuckboy Island. I mean,
Married at First Sight also
meaningful
calls itself an
difference?
experiment.
I hate it every time they brand it so heavily here. They're like, the experiment. I'm like, are they paid? Like, do they have to say the experiment like 20 times a day?
Is there a
I think the
control
answer is
group?
yes.
Like, did they
I'm like,
submit this
it's
to
not
the
an
board?
experiment. They're like, is love blind? I'm like, well, the people who can't see fall in love, yes. Well, then I don't think it's that weird to assume that you have to see a person to fall in love. It's like lots of like I have an emotional connection, and I'm like, oh God.
I mean, what are your tips on what to watch, what to avoid? I mean, we don't have to get into like specific, I know
depends
that
on
Phoebe's a connoisseur of
I mean, it depends on
like
like what you're in the mood for. Like, because part of like The Bachelor and The Bachelorette is that they at least like I don't know what they're doing now because I haven't watched it as much. Like pre-pandemic, they were going to different countries and like at the one-on-one dates, if they decided to like continue on, there'd be fireworks and a band playing and there'd be this beautiful kiss and like it is part of like the hopeless romantic fairy tale, right? Of like it's like a movie but with real people where they do the like big romantic gestures that like just touches your heartstrings. But then you have more of like the 90 Day Fiance that's a docu-series where it's like following real people doing real things, and like there's not so much of like a big romantic grand gesture because there's not as much of that like overt production put in to like do the
They're
giant
not all
fireworks.
staying in the same mansion. They're living in actual human houses for people.
Yes.
I think that one's my favorite kind because I'm not a very I have the romantic heart and I like people to be happy and I want to see that, but like I think like when we're about the first dates, my first dates were always awful. I am not a particularly romantic in the traditional sense person at all. Like probably on paper one of those worst case scenarios for a lot of people. So I don't get that sometimes. Like I watch it and it's just like confusing to me, but I also kind of like seeing it because people talk about stuff and now I have a reference point. But I like 90 Day Fiance, you're just gonna see some people who are either delusional or scripted and made up, but you get to see beautiful parts of the world, and that's kind of cool. Like I liked seeing the different like cultural traditions around, like dating or weddings and everything. That's usually kind of interesting. And I like seeing people, I don't know, coming together with like their families, and that kind of thing is interesting. So if that's what you're into, that's kind of cool. Some of them are just pure spectacle and ridiculous, like Sexy Beast. It's people, obviously, again, we can't tell what they look like, but we can tell they're all a size 0 with really like huge biceps or boobs, like, but it's people in stupid animal masks doing weird shit. And if you want to watch some people try and go boating together on a date dressed as a llama and a space alien, and who doesn't? So some of them are like just pure, like, this is bizarre and confounding, and how did it get made? And then some of it, like, it's like a competition almost, where the prize is love, but it's still a competition. So you're kind of watching people like
trying to win at love. Yeah,
I think it is kind of like football for people who don't like sport.
It's a social sport, right? Like there's still a lot of sniping and everything else. Well, let me.
There is one show which is the elephant in the room that no one has mentioned here. That's Wife Swap. No one has mentioned Wife Swap.
I loved Wife Swap.
That is the original.
My God.
That is the original one, as far as I can see, because all these other shows came from that. So for those of you that don't know what Wife Swap was, it was literally the wives of couples would literally go and just live with a total stranger, and they would go and live this life of this other person, and they would change the rules of the household. But the first week they'd live by the rules of the household. The second week they'd change all the rules of the household, and it was quite an intimate look into how relationship dynamics change. And there were some people on the British version who were just committing benefit fraud that were on these shows. And
yikes.
That is where I think it all stemmed from, because that was reality. That really was a reality show. Okay, it was within its own little box, but it genuinely was a reality show. And I mean, I watched the American version of it, and they had Penn Jillette and his wife and someone else.
That one.
And Penn Jillette and his wife are of a certain political persuasion, and the other people they were with were of a certain political persuasion. And it was just like, and Penn Jillette is a very atheist individual, and they paired them up with this Jewish couple, and it was just like, wow, you really are an arsehole sometimes.
Yeah.
Because the Jewish woman was trying to, show the children about the faith, and Penn Jillette was just sat there laughing at her. And it was just like, you really are just an arse at this precise moment in time. But that is your personality, and that really was the reality of it. And I think it does show where we've come from only having, heterosexual couples on these shows, and it all being people in a marriage, to now people, especially in some of the Married at First Sight stuff and with Naked Attraction, well, it could be anyone on these shows now.
Sure. Well, before we jump back onto the phones, do y'all have any advice? I mean, any strategies on how to more mindfully relate to this type of content? Is that antithetical to the whole concept?
I kind of do. So back in the early 2000s, those who know me well know that I sew incredible clothes. So let's just say people kept telling me there was a show I should go on. And I was not going to do that because I don't work well under a lot of situations. But I did take a look at the forums, and I do remember vividly there was a lot of pages about like your qualifications, your history, what you can do, what your brand is, blah, blah, blah. And more questions such as, are you prone to fits of anger? Do you find that you cry easily? And I'm going through it, and I'm like, they're casting the bitch, the crier, the victim. And I think, like, whenever you're watching these shows, I would always offer a little bit of grace to a lot of the people on there, because when they are, yes, people are putting themselves in for these things, but when they're going in there, they are being cast. At the very beginning, they're like, this is the guy that's going to say some sexist shit and all the women are going to get angry about. This is the crier. This is the one who's going to throw a drink. And these are the two we hope are going to have a fight. And I think, like, if you watch it knowing full well every single real person has been cast, and the situations are deliberately manipulated to elicit responses, like, you can actually find articles on it. There's lots of behind the scenes looks now from people who've left the industry talking about, like, how big fights, like, they would deliberately be talking to someone off camera and they'd be like, oh, you know, he did this, 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 and this, and getting them pissed off before they enter a room. So watching it and understanding that, much like all of the before and after fitness pictures you'll see on Instagram where the folds of the pants are in the exact same place 5 months apart, I don't think so. It's all smoke and mirrors, and it is not that real. And I think, like, you can get glimpses of real in there, but, like, if you watch it knowing full well everyone is a character and this is not who they are completely, I think that would help. Maybe in some way it helps me a little bit, because, like, I
keep
don't want to
appropriate
believe
distance and perspective.
I don't want to believe these people are like that, because wow,
but
some of them have very important jobs.
But as Christy said, we do have a caller on the line. We have Stephen from Arizona, and he wants to talk about reality dating shows. So let's bring Stephen on, and let's get Stephen on. Hello, Stephen. Can you hear us? You are on Secular Sexuality. What would you like to talk about with the four of us tonight?
Well, I'll still talk about it. I was originally going to ask what you thought about loneliness in society and how much this plays into it, but I wanted to make a couple of comments on some of the things that you've mentioned. I noted when you were talking about LGBT representation, I remember a reality show at one point where there was a woman with 3 men. Only one of the men was actually single, one of the men was married, and then the third man was gay. And they were all competing to trick her at the same time. So she would win if she picked the straight guy, but anybody of the others could win if they were picked, which I don't think that lasted very long, and I don't think it was helpful for anybody's representation, but that was something that came to mind. And the other, alongside of that, I think all of these dating shows, because of the majority of the population, tend to be very heteronormative in their approaches, and it's hard to have LGBT representation on a show like 90 Day Fiancé if they can't come into the country, even if they get married or they're engaged. You know, like that wasn't a thing in the United States at one point. So I think there's some difficulties with that. And to Miss O'Kiss, I don't know if there's an easier way to say your name, to her points, as far as the casting and how some of these things work out, again, I think it's hard to cast an entire gay storyline or bisexual storyline or pansexual storyline. I mean, the casting across the board would be kind of all over the place. So if you're really trying to create a story, I think that's one of the difficulties. But what I really wanted to bring up was sort of Ashley's point and some of the other points that you all have made about the people watching these shows and living vicariously. I know from the younger people that I talk to, they're not dating as much. There's statistical evidence they're less interested in sex. I know young people who don't know how to walk up to each other in a bar or a club because they're so used to these apps. And I wonder, my concern with some of these reality things, because they are so scripted and they are so agenda driven in some ways, that they're giving a false impression of how we should relate to each other. Like, I go back far enough with the reality genre to The Real World, where getting a gay...
Ooh, yes, The Real World.
And it was a whole different way, and it really felt more, and when you talk to the people years later, it didn't get scripted until much later in its run, but early on, it was a fly on the wall. And like you've all said, relationships are messy, dating is messy, all of those things. It's hard to pick somebody like this person is going to be interesting. So I understand the challenge because it is still entertainment. And I'm glad you're all making the point that it is entertainment less so than reality. But I worry about like the incels and people who are just socially awkward, not just because they might naturally be that way, but because we've made everybody so reliant on apps. I mean, I was really relating to Miss O'Kiss meeting people on the internet way back in the day because we kind of hid it. If we did that, we tried to like, well, let me wait until the first time I actually met them in person, and that'll be our meeting story. Not that we met online and talked for 3 months. So it's hard with reality, I think, to depict reality. And the only other thing I'll say, and then I'll stop talking because you know I ramble, Christy. The other part of it is I think fiction has a lot more influence in some ways. If we could have more or less heteronormative fiction with more LGBT characters to show what really goes on, because I think it can still be very compelling, and that's how we've done things better in society for ourselves over the previous decades. So, okay, now I'll shut up, and I really like to hear what you think.
Yeah, I just want to weigh in quickly and say that I do think that there's an interesting question to be asked about why these are becoming more popular as we are changing the way that we date, as we are sort of shifting from only dating people who live in your neighborhood or who your parents know to meeting strangers on the internet, and how reality dating may be a way of sort of coping with that. Michael Pollan writes about how viewership for food-related shows and cooking shows and competition shows and all of these things dramatically increases inversely to the amount of time we spend cooking ourselves. The less we're cooking, the more likely we are to be watching TV about cooking for whatever reason that makes sense to our weird, primitive monkey brains.
I feel called out.
There's something here. Yeah.
I would say that as someone who was a professional chef, I would avoid like the plague cooking shows because it was like a busman's holiday. So
there's a stressfulness to
it. Right. I will say though, I think like one comment you made, Stephen, about people thinking that is how things work. That is actually a trend I have noticed a lot. I used to do a lot of work with AVEN, like the Asexual Visibility and Education Network. And one of the things that would be like answering, like questions people would send in. And somehow, I guess through my social media, I became like the inbox of people with questions. And a lot of people do seem a little at a loss because I think, like, especially for maybe older people, but people are watching these shows and there's a certain shorthand used in both these dating shows and in fiction, actually. Like, we don't, like, for example, the idea of like, I saw this person, I wanted to have sex. It's like a shorthand. Everybody is supposed to understand that there was more to it than look, bang, like, and it's kind of like almost like a symbol because, the actual story of we talked on the phone and then we did this, and it's very tedious and long. So there's this short form, but a lot of people, because people aren't having these conversations with their parents, these conversations aren't happening in school, and you've got the whole, playground learning. So it's just people bigging themselves up and it's all bravado and not real. But a lot of people there are a lot of people who don't recognize the shorthand as shorthand and are becoming very confused and lost. Like, a lot of people are like, I don't think I experienced XYZ because I have never wanted to give a girl a rose. And I'm like, well, that's actually not a prerequisite for romance.
No.
That is a stand-in symbol. But again, like, that has to have a cultural background and understanding, which is not being put out there. So a lot of people are looking at these things and saying, like, this is how it works. And it's like, no, it's like when you draw a stick figure, you look at it and you're like, this is a human, but really it's just 5 sticks in a circle. But you look at the 5 sticks in a circle and you're like, yeah, that's a stand-in for people. But like, you got to have that background knowledge. And I think a lot of that is missing. Like, if you look at coming of age TV shows or movies, how much of those relationships are actually built about people being interested in each other versus, I wanted to bang and then hijinks until banging. Like, but that's not relationships. But a lot of people do see that and think that is the fullness of it. And I think reality TV maybe contributes to that. Also, maybe doesn't a little bit, because you do see some of those awkward conversations of, well, I'm very, very Christian. Well, I'm an atheist. Oh dear. Like, and that's some of, the kind of, it's missing from the shorthand again. Like, we don't see those conversations unless it's a big plot point. So maybe they can fill in some of the gaps. I don't think they do a good job of it at the moment, because a lot of it is, you were a llama and now you're a person, smush. But it's like, but yeah, I think the way we describe relationships in media, period, really needs to be improved, because those conversations, I don't think, are happening, interpersonally. I think especially people who are a little more awkward, if you don't have a lot of very close friends that you're going to have these very honest conversations with. And I could be I'm one of the people a lot of the times, like, I don't do well with a lot of those conversations. I don't have a lot of, shared experience to draw from. So I can see how a lot of people who don't have those friendships, aren't having those conversations, can be affected by this kind of thing. Because again, like, there's no one filling in the rest of the shorthand. Like, and yeah, I think reality TV could definitely help there as much as it can hurt. And I think media in general, we need to do a better job of relationships are more than just this simple A to B.
Sure.
I don't know if that was germane, or I just went off on one.
No, I was just going to say that the romance part is really important. The story I like to tell, so you get to hear it, is the most romantic thing someone ever did for me was take me to a petting zoo, which sounds really strange.
No,
but
so
he knew I loved petting zoos, and I loved animals and petting the animals, and I had been really stressed out. And it was not his favorite thing to do, for sure. And he took me to a petting zoo and handed me a bunch of food, and he sat on a bench and watched me feed goats and sheep and whatever else was there. And to me, that was the most loving, romantic thing he could have possibly done. It was perfectly timed. It was beautiful. And then the only other comment I'll have, and then I'll let you all move on to other things because I'm boring. I would love to see, because of the landscape of the world, one of the reality shows that I think would really help, I mentioned about 90 Day Fiancé. If we had a show like that, where there was an LGBT couple trying to be together across international borders or something like that, not just how their families deal with it, but what the legal stuff really becomes and what the violent threats could be, and some of those things that they really live with, that's real and not sugar-coated. I would like to see something like that, because I think it would be really educational to the public. I think it would be helpful to perceptions of my particular cohort, but just in general, because in some cases it doesn't just apply to LGBT people. Sometimes there are real difficulties. Because like you said, the two of you, Phoebe and Miss, talked about what really goes on when you want to emigrate for your partner or for any other reason, and all of these embassy visits, and it's so sugar-coated. And again, one of them I watched, they just met and they had sex immediately, talking about A to B, and it was like, how did you do that? I mean, that's just insane to me. But leaving that aside, because
we normally call those things one-night stands.
No, but like, how did you do that? Can you walk me through it very carefully?
Yeah, really. So and was it for the cameras or, implication or what have you? But so anyway, those were my thoughts, and I appreciate yours. And so thank you very much.
Anyway,
thanks so much for calling.
And that petting zoo story was so gorgeous. I'm like,
so
I
cute. Oh, I love it.
Oh, well, that was a brilliant call. That was.
It was.
It was lovely. Yeah.
I hope my boyfriend's taking notes.
Sure.
I'm ready for a petting zoo, a cat cafe of some sort.
Yeah. Well, I've got, I guess, one more question before we start to wrap it up for the night. But before we get to that, Miss O'Kist, what is the status on our poll at this point? What are the votes coming in as?
Do we want to take a guess, since we're in the competitive reality TV watching world? So I'm a little surprised it was not further apart.
I can't help but feel like the audience is sort of on my team here. What do we come up
I
with?
think if you yeah, no, they're on your team.
We'll give you their
wait.
vote.
Let's see. What was it's reality? Oh yeah, harmless entertainment. Yes, 35 said yes, it's harmless. 65 said no, it is not. And again, I think it's the genre could do more.
Sure.
But yeah, at the moment, it's.
It could be far worse.
I mean, it could be worse. I think we all agree it could be better. But I mean, I know that there's a reason y'all are drawn to these things, and we've talked about it in a couple of different ways. But I wanted to sincerely ask before we walked out the door, what are the recommendations you want to make? I mean, can you restore my faith in humanity? Is there a particular show, a recent scene or plot line? I mean, something that you would encourage people to go out and watch that might convince skeptics like me that there's some value here, something wholesome.
No.
Yes. I do.
Well, I
I can.
Here's the thing.
Phoebe, let me start with you, Phoebe, real quick, and then I'll get to y'all.
Well, it is. I'm gonna shill for Naked Attraction here, because the show itself uncovers those layers and does it almost backwards. Yes, okay, there are elements to the show where it is just objectifying somebody, but the show itself has this premise of you're not here to listen to somebody's spiel. What are you actually attracted to? What are you finding physically attractive here? And it's going back to that base instinct of, well, I find this attractive, and that's not something to be ashamed of.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's become this whole plethora of things where people have become ashamed and embarrassed to say, I find this attractive. I don't find this attractive.
Sure.
I'm sorry, you're not attractive to me. It's nothing against you personally. It's just I don't find you attractive. I find you attractive. Let's see how it goes. And that's what I like about that show, because it's going back and saying, hey, I'm allowed to have my own preferences here. Let's just say, woo, you're attractive.
Well, it's also not very mean-spirited. Like, there's no drama or anything. And like at the end, they have that bit where the two,
where the
close
contestant
call,
then takes their clothes off.
and they're like, what do you think is good about this other person? Like, I guess the competition is like, oh, well, I always wish I had an ass like yours. And then they have like this like camaraderie moment. And these are the two people who are now head to head for the prize of love. And they're like, oh, I wish I was as tall and confident as you, or I wish. And people, like, they gas each other up before they see the other person naked that's going to come in and pick one of them. And it's like, it's weirdly wholesome.
It is.
It is weirdly wholesome.
And the show itself is weirdly inclusive.
It really is. Like, I've seen like the poly couples where like there's two of us, or they have like people who are like pansexual, and there's just
They have trans
everything.
people on there who have all genitalia on there. So it's not just trans people who have gone off and had all of the surgeries that you would stereotypically expect. No. It's
they have
hello.
a lot of body types.
These are
they have
real
different
people
ages.
here. Yeah, and it's not just your heterosexual monogamous people on this show.
And they even kind of talk about stuff a bit too. If they introduce something that might be a bit wild, they'll actually have like a little bit of an infographic and a bit of information on why people are really into stinky feet or whatever it is. So you're like, now I know a little bit more about pheromones and feet. It is, honestly, it's probably the best reality dating show there is. And
all right, yeah, two for Naked Attraction.
I would say the Love is Blind Japan was genuinely quite touching. Like, when one dude got turned down, all the other guys were like, oh my god, feel so bad for you. And you actually got to see some like non-toxic masculinity in a competition. It was and the people were asking very sensible questions that, honestly, if you're thinking about getting married, you might want to ask. Like, how do you see the division of labor in the house? Or what are your hopes and dreams? How will you support me in my hopes and dreams? And how will I support you? And people actually like figuring that shit out was kind of interesting. And it was so wholesome. I was like watching it and being like, oh, hot the whole time, and nobody was throwing a drink, and I didn't expect anyone to lose a false nail attacking anybody else. It was like quite charming.
It might be telling that, you know, we've mentioned one show that is not available in the States. We've mentioned another dating show that's specifically set in Japan. Ashley, do you have a good hometown, wholesome American reality TV show for me, or even just a particular plot line or anything else that you think can defend the genre?
Well, here's the thing. I'm a terrible salesman. Like, because if you're really not into it, like, that's totally fucking fine.
Sure.
Because I think there comes to me of like, I do not care if someone judges me for watching this shit. Like,
Sure.
Don't, like, it's like something that like brings me joy. So if it doesn't bring you joy, like, don't fucking watch it. Like, because I think like the most important thing of like take it away from the conversation is that like take reality TV with a grain of salt. Like, look up people like after they've been on the show. That's a big thing that I like to do after I watch a season of 90 Day Fiancé, of like, what have these people said after the fact? Like, what have they gotten from it? And maybe that could restore a bit of like faith in the show, because there are people who have had like wonderful experiences on that show and talk about like how much like it helped them. And also, I didn't know really anything about like a K1 visa until I watched that show. Like, as much as it's maybe not like totally accurate, it at least gave me some sort of introduction into the subject. And I think it's just, if you want to like dip your toe in, like, I think it's like finding the thing that like you like, do you want the big romantic gestures of The Bachelor, where you also see the same blonde white bitch get engaged season after season after season, because they all look the damn same? Or do you want something that's more real people, like doing real things, like on 90 Day Fiancé? Like, it really just comes down to escapism and just like finding the thing that like, you know, what's got you hot and bothered. What makes you feel good? And if this isn't the thing, go find something else. Plenty of other shit out there to watch.
Well said. We talked about the importance of play, and that seems like at least a piece of this conversation, to not take all of our media, all of our lives too seriously.
Yeah, like, we're all just floating human meat sacks on a rock. Like, if you don't like to watch...
Throw drinks at each other and watch TV about it.
Yeah, like, just don't take it too fucking seriously. Like, reality TV doesn't take itself too seriously if you like really actually watch it. Like, if it's not your jam, there's something else out there for you.
As I said earlier, when I'm sat there with my cake, wine, I'm not taking National Enquirer seriously at all.
No. Like, do I want a billionaire mafia mob boss to kidnap me and take me to his BDSM dungeon? No, not in real life.
Aww.
But am I going to read it? Abso-fucking-lutely. Like, they're two separate things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, that is fair and true. There's like reality that we live and the reality we want to watch. And sometimes we just want to watch people get into drag out fights over something really daft whilst drinking out of a hideous gold goblet. Those glasses are hideous. I hate them. Like, it's a love. Was it Love at First Sight or whatever? No.
Love at Worst Sight.
But they all have to drink out these ridiculous aluminium gold goblet things, and they are hideous. So hopefully it does not aid the sale of those. So yeah, hate on the set design, hate on the people, and remember that they're probably not as big as shitheads, or maybe they are. I don't know.
Some of them are.
Some of them are. So I guess, I mean, before we wrap it up, do we have any links for Ashley, who doesn't like a big footprint on the internet?
I mean, if you do want to work with me and you live in Texas, you can find me by going to this tiny URL or Google me and find me on Psychology Today. Otherwise, please don't perceive me on the internet. I have no desire to be perceived.
Oh.
At least on the internet. You can perceive me outside the internet.
Okay. Free thought library and all.
So if anybody wants to follow Ashley and contact work with her, we had the graphic up there, and if anyone is interested in keeping up with what's happening with us over at the ACA, you can find them on the website at atheist-community.org, or you can email the show at sex@atheist-community also org, and that sounds hot and saucy, actually. I'm like, email sex. All right. Sex with atheists.
Sex.
We also have the tiny.cc podcasts for one-stop shop for all of the podcasts from the ACA, of which we are but one. There are many. And you can find them all there. And also there's the Facebook Secular Sexuality fan group, where you can have very heated discussions if you want about dating shows with other people who are watching it but don't want to have their voice held up here for posterity. And then tiny.cc/ACD Discord.
Yeah.
I am bad at reading. For the Discord chats, and tiny.cc merch ACA for all of our beautiful merch, of which there, I believe, still t-shirts and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Dress stylish like we do.
Yeah. And finally, we want to make sure to thank everybody who helped us put this show on today. Shout out to the folks who did a lot of work to help prep that weren't able to make it tonight, as well as everybody on our crew. Take a moment to see that crew cam. Thank y'all so much for all that hard work.
It's Secular Sexuality reality TV now.
Yeah, right?
It's Secular Crew Show.
Got a rose for each
God,
of you.
yes.
Yeah.
One is white, one is yellow, and one is red.
Yeah. Are there any kind of final thoughts you'd like to leave with the audience tonight? We're a little bit over time, so Phoebe, let me start with you, and we'll go snappy from here.
It's television. Remember that.
Just remember it's television. Well said. Miss O'Kist, how about from you?
I guess Andy Warhol said everyone was going to get their 15 minutes of fame, and now everybody gets to have, if they want it, an entire season of fame. And they have a little control over it, and maybe not a lot, but they get it. Their 15 minutes or however long they end up on one of those shows.
Sure. And Ashley, what are some final thoughts you'd like to leave with us before we step out?
Well, as Phoebe said, it's just television. It's not a dick. Don't take it so hard.
Fair enough.
Boom.
And Christy, did we convince you, Christy? Have we got a convert?
You know, I am with you that it, quote, can be better. I am not convinced that it is or will be, but I do want to say that I believe that there are some shows that exist that are of a quality. But man, there is so much to sort through and so much bullshit. And so I guess from me, if I am going to weigh in at all, it would just be to say that you should consume these things mindfully. And by that, I don't necessarily mean only watch programming that lines up with your values.
You should do it whilst meditating.
Well, yeah. No, but more like notice how these things impact you. We've talked a lot about 90 Day Fiancé, and I wasn't meaning to give this speech, but I'll say that show in particular involves a lot of storylines around like really aggressive mate guarding, really aggressive, like if you even have a friend of the opposite sex, then there's something wrong with you. And I noticed that just being around that content really upset me as somebody who is not super dudish and who has a ton of female friends and who has lived a polyamorous lifestyle. It's upsetting to think that this is somehow normalized. But that doesn't mean that I can't enjoy a bunch of people in bikinis on beaches being bitches towards one another. And so if you can find enjoyment, find enjoyment. And I guess with that, I'll just tell everybody that, you know, whether you are here to make friends, whether you're here to find love or to win at all costs, I just want to encourage everybody watching tonight to go and give themselves a nice big ol' orgasm. Or better yet, give somebody else one.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.